All right, so today we're going to dive into something I think a lot of people would rather not think about.
Yeah.
What happens if you get arrested
It's not a fun topic.
and you end up at the police station? I think most people would be pretty freaked out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very stressful situation,
Yeah.
But like we always say, knowledge is power. So understanding your rights and, what to expect can really help you navigate it, a little bit better. So we're going to kind of walk through that today. I'm going to kind of take on the role of the solicitor. Think of me as your solicitor.
Okay.
And you're the client.
Got it.
So you've just been arrested.
Oh, no.
What's the first thing that's going to happen when you get to that police station?
I'm assuming I'm going to be like searched and all that kind of stuff, but like, where do I go? What happens?
So the first thing that happens is you get booked in, and you're booked in by the custody officer, and this is usually a sergeant. And they're impartial to the investigation. Their job is just to make sure that everything is done by the book. And, following the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, 1984,
Is a mouthful.
which is, otherwise known as PACE,
Okay.
and they'll create what's called the custody record. And this is like a log of everything that happens when you're detained at the police station.
So they write it down. Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Does that mean I can see it?
Yes. So this is actually a really important point. You and your solicitor have a right to see this custody record, and it's mandated by Code C of PACE-E. And, I think it's important because you need to know what's being documented about you. You want to make sure everything's accurate.
Right. And what if I find out they're lying about something?
Well, that's why it's good to see it, because then you know what's going on.
Right. Okay.
And then you can raise, your concerns. So you sat there, you've been booked in. What's going through your mind? What's your biggest concern at this point?
Probably like, what are my rights? What can I do? What can't I do?
So let's talk about your rights. Now, it's important to remember that you have these rights. Whether you've been arrested or even if you attend the police station voluntarily, so even if you're just, popping in for a little chat,
Oh, really? It's still the same?
your rights still apply.
Yeah.
And one of the most important rights that you have is your right to free and independent legal advice.
Okay.
So that's your right to a solicitor,
Okay.
and that's contained in Section 58 of PACE.
Got it.
Another right that you have, really important one, is the right to have someone informed of your arrest.
Okay. So I can call my mom.
You can call your mom. You can call a friend, family member. And that's contained in Section 56 of PACE.
They can't stop me from doing that.
Yeah, they can't stop you from doing that. They have to make a reasonable effort to inform that person.
Okay.
So, if they can't get through on the phone, they should try, a couple of times. And it can be done by phone, by letter, all sorts. And then another really important point is that the custody officer is required to do regular reviews to make sure your detention is still lawful.
What does that mean?
So they can't just keep you there forever.
So there's a time limit.
Okay.
What is it?
There is a time limit. So for less serious offenses, what we call summary offenses, you can only be held for a maximum of 24 hours before the police have to either release you or charge you.
Okay. So a day.
Yep, 24 hours. Now, if it's a more serious offense, what we call an indictable offense, it gets a bit more complicated.
Okay.
So you can initially be detained for 24 hours,
Right.
but a police superintendent can authorize an extension of up to 36 hours.
So that's a day and a half.
A day and a half.
Okay.
And if they need to hold you any longer than that, they need to apply to the magistrate's court for a warrant of further detention.
They have to go to court just to keep me there longer?
Yep.
Wow. Now, even with the warrant, there's an absolute limit of 96 hours.
So that's 4 days.
4 days.
Wow.
And after that, they have to either charge you or release you.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about these time limits, it's based on what's called the relevant time. And, this isn't always as simple as it sounds.
What does that mean?
It usually refers to the time that you arrive at the police station. So, for example, if you initially attend the police station voluntarily to answer some questions, but then they decide they want to arrest you, the 24 hours starts ticking from the time that you're arrested.
Oh, okay.
So if you, went to the police station at 10 in the morning voluntarily, but they didn't arrest you until, 2 in the afternoon, it's from 2 in the afternoon that the clock starts.
I see.
So it's when the detention becomes lawful.
So they can't be like, oh, well, you were already here for 5 hours.
Okay.
So that counts towards your COM4. Exactly. The clock starts when the detention becomes lawful, and that's usually at the point of arrest. There are really, specific rules about how to calculate this relevant time, and it can get quite complex. But the important thing to remember is that there are limits.
Right. Okay.
They can't keep you there forever.
So back to that, to have someone informed of my arrest, can I just call anyone? How does that work?
You get to choose who you want notified. And you can usually contact them by phone or by letter. Obviously, it won't be a private conversation,
Right.
but it's just to let someone know where you are and what's going on. However, there are a few situations where the police can actually delay this right.
They can delay letting me tell someone I'm arrested.
Yes.
When would that ever happen?
It's not common. It can only happen in very specific circumstances. And it has to be for an indictable offense, so one of those more serious offenses. And it has to be authorized by an inspector or above. And they need to have a good reason. They need to have reasonable grounds to suspect that informing someone of your arrest will lead to one of four things.
Okay.
So one of four things. It will either lead to interference with or harm to evidence, or it will lead to injury to other people. It will lead to alerting other suspects who haven't yet been arrested, or it will hinder the recovery of any stolen property.
Oh, wow.
So it has to be, a good reason.
That's serious.
It's serious stuff. But even if they have legitimate grounds to delay, the delay cannot be for any longer than 36 hours.
Okay, so similar to the time limits,
Right.
there's a safeguard there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about balancing the needs of the investigation, but also your fundamental rights.
Right.
You mentioned earlier your right to a solicitor. Now, are there any situations where they can stop you from getting legal advice?
So I thought that was like a fundamental right.
Right. It is a fundamental right.
Okay.
And like I said, it applies even if you attend the police station voluntarily. However, just like with informing someone, there is a provision to delay your access to legal advice. But again, only in very specific circumstances.
Okay.
And the criteria are the same.
So those same four things.
The same four things. It has to be an indictable offense. It has to be authorized by an inspector or above. And those same reasonable grounds have to exist. And it's important to understand as well, the police have to have solid documented grounds for delaying these rights. They can't just do it on a whim. It's a really serious decision.
It sounds like it.
They have to think carefully about it. And this is because improperly delaying your access to legal advice could impact the admissibility of evidence later down the line at court.
What does that mean?
So, for example, if you say something during a police interview that incriminates you, and the police have improperly delayed you getting advice from a solicitor, that statement may not be admissible in court.
So the case could get thrown out because they didn't let me talk to my lawyer.
Yeah, potentially. And that's why the custody record is so important, because that records, the reasons for these delays and whether they were lawful or not.
Got it.
Okay.
Makes sense. So let's say, I'm in this situation. I'm at the station. I'm feeling really vulnerable. I haven't eaten. I'm tired, scared.
Mm-hmm.
Do they take that into account?
Yeah, absolutely. So the law recognizes that certain people may be vulnerable in a police situation. So, for example, if you've got mental health problems, or you're a juvenile, or if you've got communication difficulties, you don't speak English very well.
Got it.
Anything like that, the police are required to consider whether you're vulnerable.
Well,
And this is all contained within Code C of PACE.
right.
So if they think that you are vulnerable, they have to get you what's called an appropriate adult.
What's an appropriate adult?
So this could be a family member, a guardian, a social
Yeah.
worker, someone who can, support you, safeguard your rights, help you understand what's going on.
So someone to kind of be on my side
Yeah,
and make sure things are fair.
exactly.
Okay.
And they have the right to be present during any questioning.
Okay.
However, an important point to make is that anything you say to an appropriate adult isn't subject to the same confidentiality as what you say to your solicitor.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so anything you say to a solicitor is confidential. They can't repeat that to anyone.
Okay.
But an appropriate adult, anything you say to them can be repeated.
I see.
So it's really important to understand that.
So they're kind of there to help me through the process, but
Exactly.
not necessarily to keep my secrets.
Exactly.
Got it.
And this assessment of vulnerability is an ongoing process.
Okay.
So just because they decide, when you first arrive at the police station that you're not vulnerable, that doesn't mean things can't change.
Right.
So, as time goes on, they need to keep assessing that. So the police are saying, right, we want to interview you now. What's your first thought?
Probably like, do I have to talk to them?
Well, that's a good question. So there are three main options.
Okay.
You can answer their questions. You can provide a full account.
Okay.
You can exercise your right to silence. So essentially say no comment to all their questions.
Okay.
Or you can provide a prepared statement and then decline to answer any questions.
Okay.
So those are your three main options.
And which one's the best?
That's the million-dollar
I
question.
figured.
There's no right or wrong answer. It really depends on the specific circumstances of your case.
Okay. So, okay, let's say they do want to interview me. What can they do? What can they not do?
Yeah, good question. So, I think a lot of people think, oh, the police can lie to you. They see all these things on TV, right?
Right.
But actually, the police can't lie to you about evidence. They can't make promises that they can't keep. And they can't use, what we call oppressive tactics to try and force you to confess. So, for example, they can't, assault you. They can't threaten you.
Okay, so like that whole good cop, bad cop thing,
Exactly.
that doesn't really happen.
It shouldn't happen.
Right.
If they use these sorts of tactics, then any confession that you make is likely to be thrown out by the court anyway.
Okay, so it's got to be fair.
It's got to be fair, and it's got to be, within the rules. And those rules are set out in PACE, Code C.
Oh, Code C again.
Code C.
Okay.
Um, and that Code C, governs all sorts of things. The physical environment of the interview room, the way questions are asked, all these things are contained in Code C. So, for example, the interview has to be held at the police station unless there are exceptional circumstances. The room that you're interviewed in has to be properly lit and heated and ventilated.
So they can't drag me down a dark alley.
Exactly. They can't just interview you anywhere.
Right.
You have to be given regular breaks as well for refreshments, toilet breaks, particularly if the interview is going to be a long one.
Okay.
The police have to be mindful of your physical and mental state as well. So if at any point you seem distressed or unwell, they have to stop the interview.
So if I'm crying or having a panic attack,
Exactly. They can't just ignore that.
they can't just keep going.
Can't just keep going. Okay.
They have to address your needs. And, this goes back to vulnerability as well. So,
Yeah.
if you're deemed vulnerable, you'll have that appropriate adult present as well to support you.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about adverse inferences,
Yes.
I know we've talked about this a little bit. How do you think that actually works? Like, what do you think that actually means in practice?
Well, like I said, I don't know. If I don't say anything, do they just say, like, oh, you must be guilty then?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
There's actually a specific procedure that has to be followed. So first of all, the police have to caution you.
Yeah. The one that says, it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court.
Oh, yeah.
You know that one.
Yeah.
So that caution is really important, and it has to be given to you at the right time. And it has to be given to you using the correct wording. So the police can't just paraphrase it. It has to be word for word what's set out in law.
Mhm.
And if they get it wrong, then that could, have implications for any adverse inferences later down the line. So it's not just about your rights. It's about the police following the rules
Right.
and doing things properly as well.
Okay, so they can't just wing it, basically.
Exactly.
Sure.
So you have your rights as a suspect, but the police have their responsibilities as well.
So it's kind of, like you said, a two-way street.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Now, there are a few other situations as well where remaining silent can actually be risky.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So even if they've given me the caution.
Even if they've given you the caution. And this is all contained within the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994.
Okay, so this is different from PACE.
Different from PACE, yeah.
Okay.
And it relates to, failing to account for certain things. So, for example, Section 36 of that act deals with failing to account for objects, substances, or marks.
I have no idea what that means.
So let me give you an example. Imagine you get arrested near a burglary.
Okay.
And you've got a screwdriver in your pocket.
Okay.
And that screwdriver matches the marks on the door where the burglary took place.
Oh.
Now, if the police ask you to account for that screwdriver and you make no comment, the court can actually draw an adverse inference from that silence.
Oh, wow. So it's not enough just to stay quiet.
Not in that situation, no. And Section 37 is very similar. But that relates to failing to account for your presence at a particular place. So if you get arrested near a crime scene and you don't give an explanation for why you were there, the court can, again, draw an adverse inference from your silence.
Okay.
So it's all about context,
Mhm.
It's about, do you have an explanation for something?
So basically, if they ask me a specific question like, what's this? Or what were you doing there?
Mm-hmm.
I should probably try to answer it.
Yeah, generally it's a good idea to try and provide some sort of explanation. Even if it seems weak at the time,
Okay.
it's better than saying nothing.
So like in that screwdriver example, what if I just had that screwdriver because I was fixing something at home and I forgot it was in my pocket?
Exactly.
Is that a good enough explanation?
Yeah, it's a good enough
But
explanation.
what if I'm too scared to say anything or I just can't think straight, you know?
Well, that's where the solicitor comes in,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So they can help you articulate your explanation, even if you're feeling stressed or, panicking. And they can make sure that the questions that the police are asking are fair and appropriate. So it's always good to have that solicitor there, fighting your corner for you. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so you've decided you're going to answer questions in the interview. What sort of things can they ask you? What are they allowed to ask about?
I don't know. Anything.
Well, they can ask you anything that is relevant to the investigation, but they have to ask it fairly.
Okay.
So, they can't use leading questions to try and, suggest a particular answer. They can't badger you, try and get you to admit to something you haven't done. And they can't ask, irrelevant questions or overly personal questions that have got nothing to do with the case.
Okay.
So you're right.
So it's kind of like this delicate balance between them trying to get information out of me,
Exactly.
but also being fair and, respecting my rights.
It is a delicate balance. And remember, you don't have to answer every question that they put to you. You can consult with your solicitor first, or choose to remain silent on certain topics if you think that's the best course of action. So it's all about strategy,
Okay.
and making sure that you're making the right decisions for you.
Okay. Well, it definitely feels like, even though this is a scary topic,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lot less scared now,
Good.
having gone through all this with you.
That's good to hear.
Because it feels like, there are things that I can do and things that I should know about.
Exactly. And that's what we're here for, to give you that knowledge and, hopefully empower you so that if you ever find yourself in this situation, you've got some idea of what to expect and what your options are.
Right. Okay. So what happens next? Let's say the interview's over. What happens? Do they decide whether to charge me or let me go or?
Yeah, so that's what happens after the interview.
Yeah.
So the police will have to make a decision about what they want to do with you.
Okay.
And that decision's going to be based on a number of factors. Obviously, how strong is the evidence against you?
Huh.
What were you like in the interview?
Okay.
Did you come across well? Did you come across as, shifty?
Right.
Do you have any previous convictions? Are you a risk to the public? All of these things are going to be factored into their decision.
So they could decide not to charge me, but still keep me locked up if they think I'm dangerous.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously, they've got to have good grounds for that. And, those time limits that we talked about earlier,
Right.
they still apply. So they can't just keep you there forever.
Right. Okay.
So if they do decide to charge you, then you'll be brought before the magistrate's court
Okay.
for your first appearance. And that's when, you'll officially be asked to enter a plea. And the whole kind of legal process will start.
Wow. So it's a long road.
It's a long road.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we went through it. I feel a lot better about it now.
Yeah, good.
Is there anything else that, someone in this position should know?
Yeah.
Any last things I should keep in mind?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway is stay calm.
Right.
Know your rights and get legal advice as soon as possible.
Yep.
Don't try and be a hero. Don't try and handle it on your own.
Right.
Get a solicitor involved
Okay.
as early as possible.
Yeah.
Because they can, guide you through the process
Okay.
and really, help make sure that your rights are being protected.
Right. And I guess, even though it might feel like the end of the world at the time, just remember that just because you've been arrested, it doesn't mean that you're guilty.
Absolutely.
You're innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
And you have the right to a fair trial.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember as well that, the law is constantly evolving.
Right.
New technologies are emerging. Society is changing. So, all of these things can impact your rights
That's a good point.
in ways that you might not expect. So it's always good to keep yourself informed, stay up to date, and, just be aware of what your rights are.
Awesome. Well, thanks for walking me through all that. And thanks for listening to this deep dive into your rights at the police station.
No problem.
It's been interesting, to say the least.
Mhm.
And hopefully you guys out here listening have learned a lot. If you want more information about this topic, feel free to check out our show notes.
Yes, we'll put some links in there.
Yeah, we've got lots of resources for you. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.